Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here, and this is the desktop lecture for week 5, module 5. So we only have one more week left. That's how fast these 6-week classes go by. So this week we have a couple of things. We have chapters 11 and 12 that you have to read, and then also we have another winners and losers assignment, which is the same as the one that you had in the first week of classes. So I want you to write about a historical figure that you're reading about in any of these chapters, 9, 10, 11, or 12, who won, who lost, and a brief idea, a sentence or two of a history from their point of view. So again, this is just a sort of a critical thinking exercise to make you think about perspectives in history. As I said earlier, I think in week 1, a history written from the standpoint of a slave or from a standpoint of a Native American would be totally different than the history that our textbook puts forward, which is written by American academics. So give that some thought during this exercise, how things might look different from someone else's perspective and who paid the price in the historical narrative. So, and I think that's pretty easy to do this week because chapter 11 and chapter 12. Chapter 11 is really the first chapter that addresses what's going on in society. Prior to this time, the rest of the chapters we've read have talked about politics, they've talked about the economy, they've talked about wars. And chapter 11 is interesting because this period of the early 1800s, there's something called the Second Great Awakening, which is this rebirth or re-strengthening of Christianity and religion. So think in terms of really early evangelism maybe is a good idea. This idea that there is some morality coming forth in society based on the Christian ethics. So the Second Great Awakening happens early in the 1800s, but the other thing that happens, which is social but is also economic, is that this period of market revolution or great expansion of the economy is occurring as well. And it only makes sense because there's been so much land added. We had the Louisiana Purchase, and so there's all this western land being added, and with it, don't forget controversy about slavery, but also what's going to happen as we get into chapter 12 is this notion of manifest destiny. And manifest destiny is like a slogan, if you will, a meme, and that a journalist came up with back in the early 1840s. But it was this idea that it is our destiny as Americans to take over the entire landmass of North America. Well, at least not North America, but the current United States. So this notion is going to be moved forward by the idea that beyond the Louisiana Purchase, there is also going to be the Mexican-American War. So 1848 is a huge year for me as a historian in this whole period of time, because 1847, 1848, there is the Mexican-American War. So that's something that the United States comes out on top of. So we add in Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, California. So the landmass in the country expands greatly during this period of time. So now this notion of manifest destiny, expanding from sea to shining sea, if you will, really takes hold because so much more land is being added into the country. So that's one thing that happens in 1848 in the U.S. The other thing that happens is Seneca Falls. So that's the sort of the first meeting of the women's movement. So again, you see this idea of the women's movement, abolitionism, anti-slavery stuff. And that's all getting tied in with this Second Great Awakening and this idea of Christian morality and Christian ethic. The Quakers are involved. A lot of other Christian religions are involved in these social movements. Getting outside of the United States, and you don't have to know this, but think of some of the other things that are happening. Karl Marx, 1848, writes the Communist Manifesto. So things are going to start to change in Europe. The notion of communism isn't going to come to fruition until the early 1900s, but it's out there. It's another sort of form of government or form of society. 1848 also, the Irish potato famine. So, we've been reading a lot about immigrants in our readings, and that's just one part of the Irish coming over to the United States, driven by food shortages and lack of work, quite frankly. So 1848 is a big year. If you're a historian of technology like I am, it's also the year of the telegraph. The telegraph is invented that year, so that's pretty cool as well as far as technology goes. It's really the beginning of point-to-point communications, and I would argue the beginning of networking that the internet eventually gets based on all those years later, although a lot of people would argue with me on that one. So 1848 is a big deal. Andrew Jackson, earlier than 1848, 1830s, is a person who comes in as a populist. I'm going a little bit backwards, but it's interesting. So he eliminates the second bank of the United States. It would be like eliminating the Federal Reserve, and there's a big panic in the country, a panic of 1837. Now, panics are what depressions are now, or even recessions, but historians and people at the time always called them panics. So a lot of banks failed, there's a lot of economic turmoil, but the economy is still booming in the sense that there's an expansion of land. But with a booming economy, there's boom and bust like there is today. So the panic of 1837, the economy is really bad. But at the same time, I think the fundamentals are there, and I know the fundamentals are there because I know what happens, that the economy will pull out prior to the Civil War and get strong again. So sort of the big points here: Manifest Destiny, Mexican-American War, land expansion, and also you have the winners and losers assignment coming up, and it's due on Friday, June 15th, I believe. I know it's June 15th, so whether that's a Friday or not, I'm not sure, but I think it is. So it's a little bit different than the other assignments as far as the due date is concerned. So make sure you pay attention to that. And next week we'll have our final exam and your final reading, which will be Chapter 13. The final is multiple choice. It's going to be 30 questions, 10 points a question. And more than half the questions are going to be exactly the same as the first two quizzes. So if you want to go back and look at those quizzes, that would be helpful to review. And then there'll be some additional questions about Chapter 13. And there's some questions about the Constitution that we didn't cover, but I give you a link on those questions so you can look up the answers real quick. It's just basic stuff that you should know in this history course. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, let me know. Keep up the good work. Be safe, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.